older than I would like to be. It's a great honor to be the first speaker in this conference. It's probably just a matter of a hierarchy of the teams. I don't expect to be the first because I am somehow the first. But at any rate, it's an honor also to be in Warsaw and on the occasion of the celebration of the history of solidarity, of course. I'd like to remember that Solidarność in the late 80s was more or less for the people in Europe, in Western Europe, around the world, a sort of myth like the myth of the Cuban Revolution. We used to think that there were movements of liberation in the world, one of which had been the Fidel Castro's South American Revolution, but the other one, very important point, was Solidarność and the revolt of the workers of Dansk against the communist, Stalinist regime of the epoch. So, of course, there was also a difference between, a relevant difference between the Cuban Revolution, the myth of Cuban Revolution, and the Solidarność mythology. The second one being explicitly supported by the Pope, which was not the case for the first. Well, not generally, maybe by some basis Catholics in Cuba, but not by the Popes. Okay, now this is an important point to remember because I think it is one of the reasons we start with this theme on the solidarity of faith, whether is it possible or not, and so on. It is, we are in a country, and in this, under this point of view, Italy is very similar to, or even worse, than Poland. Religion, Catholicism, is an important factor of common social, political life, and so on. I will start by, I try to read orderly, with not disorderly my text, but I have to say from the very beginning on then that one of the point of my presentation may be summarized in these terms. The title sounds, is the solidarity of faith possible? I would like to change a little bit the title. Is the solidarity of faith necessary? Do we really need something of this kind? The general atmosphere of my attitude on this point is that I am preaching not unity, but multiplicity, and maybe also a little bit conflict. At the very end, the solidarity of faith or the unity is always something desirable for people who possess the power. The powerful needs unity. The weak, I don't know why, they need the unity in order to revolt altogether, but no more than that. Immediately after the revolution, unity becomes a sort of oppression, authoritarianism, and so on and so forth. Having said this as a form of introduction, I'll try to respect my time and then discuss, of course, thanking above all my colleague to be patient to listen to me also. Generally, I start with philosophical considerations. I am a philosopher, not a theologian, but as you know, all philosophers are sort of impoverished theologians, so I am something of this kind. Generally, the crisis of the universal concept of truth and of the universalism that belongs to it is tied to the epistemological recognition of rationality's limits. we have become wiser in pretending that we actually know the true and definitive essence of things. There is, in other words, I summarize a little bit, a crisis of universalism in our world. People used to ask, who says that? When you pronounce the famous sentence by Tarski, was he a Polish? Tarski? Tarski, okay. Another homage to a Paul, not only John Paul II. Well, okay. Tarski, when you say the famous true sentence of Tarski, it rains is true only if it rains. Said in these terms, it looks like a sort of absolute truism, but you don't have to forget that for the first it rains, there are two quotation marks. So the sentence, it rains, is true only if it rains. The question is that almost nobody believes that, well, let's say, the spontaneous question is, who says the second it rains? Why the second it rains, which makes true the first it rains, is not written between quotation marks? Who is authorized to eliminate the quotation marks? So this summarizes more or less the crisis of universalism in our situation. In the late 19th, 20th century, what Paul Ricoeur, with an expression of Nietzsche called l'école du suspect, du soupçon, pardon, the school of suspicion. We are suspicious. So, I try to recover my text, but don't. Regardless of how things go on this point. By the way, my first step is to recognize that the idea of universality in the Greek philosophy started in the moment in which Greeks started to have commerces with other cultures, with the barbarians. So they wanted to present them with some universal truth in order to agree with them or to. But generally, the idea of universality goes always together with the idea of power. I always, I take an example which may be more familiar to a Catholic tradition, like the Polish one. St. Thomas wrote his main work on natural theology, on the demonstration of the existence of God, which is the Summa Contra Gentiles, as a handbook for missionaries. I mean, the missionaries who were supposed to go around the world to convert other people, other religions, and so on, to Christianity, had to present universal, rational, natural reasons to believe in God. Summa contra gentiles, this contra is not explicitly thought by St. Thomas as against, but it's not so far from that. I mean, we are confronted with somebody who doesn't believe what we believe, then we try to appeal to the universal rationality of mankind. And if you think what happened to the Gentiles, to the pagans at the beginning of modernity, with the conquest of Latin America by the Spaniards and so on, well, you can realize that this contra was really a contra. I mean, we arrive with our armies and we oblige you to convert. This is strange. I am a good Catholic. I am a made Christian. I don't dare to ask to call myself a Catholic now, because there are too many reasons for me not to listen to the Pope. But I listen still to the gospel. I do my best to imitate Jesus, which is not very easy. And by the way, it's more and more difficult to distinguish the Christ of the tradition, or to identify the Christ of the tradition with the Jesus of the history. So all that is a complete open problem. But at any rate, this idea of Western and Christian universalism, having been so strictly tied to colonialism, imperialism, Eurocentrism, and so on, cannot be left aside as an accident. It is not that it was pure accident that people tried to convert other cultures to Christianity by violence. St. Augustine, who is a great Christian thinker and very respectable for many reasons, but he invented the famous sentence, compelle intrare, oblige them to enter. Where? Into the church, of course. So compelle was made for the sake of their souls. All over the tradition of the Christian history, there were martyrs killed because they had to be converted. Of course, Giordano Bruno, the Italian the heretics of the 16th century, the Inquisition, or what you call it, and so on. Okay, this compelle intrare. Universalism has this basic sin, this original sin. It is always marked already by Plato. In the Republic, he says that if somebody has seen the true light outside the cavern, he will have the worry to call his fellow men to come out. And if they don't want, they say, no, I am very well here in the cavern. It's not so cold and so. He will say, no, come on, come on. And then if they still refuse, he can take them by the hair and throw them outside. So go ahead and you will see a lot of history of Euro-Christian imperial universalism. That's the question we have now. This is why we can consider, I read from a certain point on, providential e felix culpa the fact that today we are faced with the problem of religion wars. Emphasizing the absurdity of such wars not only means recognizing more clearly what is happening, clearing out an error. It is also an occasion to clarify the sense of religion in our world in favor of the religious consciousness, which will hopefully also serve the implicated churches and confessions. In sum, thinking about the question and inactuality of religious wars in our world also means to begin to think in a more authentic way the universalism of the great religions of salvation upon which the modern world has constituted itself and has fertilized the Western civilization we belong to. This is why I talk about the end of metaphysics in Heidegger's sense. I had already cited it in the lines before. Today, each universalism, each claim that founds itself upon a truth which is supposed to be known by every human being, has to come to terms with the phenomenon unimaginable in previous historical worlds where civilization lived much more isolated than today, with the phenomenon of globalization. This implies both the necessity of a direct confrontation between ideas and the awareness that this confrontation is never a pure confrontation of ideas. My final thesis would be that between religions there would be no conflict if they were not tied to systems of power. I cannot imagine that in Italy so many people hate Jesus. They hate the Vatican. Okay, there is a little difference. And they hate the Vatican as long as the Vatican claims to be determinant for their political, social, familiar, ethical life. Of course, ethics is something which is traditionally tied to religion, but when the church claims that it founds its ethics upon the natural law, then there is a matter of knowledge there. How does the church know the natural law? And not I know my natural law. Why should I take seriously what the Pope says about me, and he doesn't take seriously what I say about myself? Okay, but we are not exaggerating if we think that also universalism of the other cultures, pretending, for instance, for Muslims, pretending to convert Europe into Islam, also the universalism of these other cultures and religions is one of the harms produced by the colonial dominion over other populations. Each intercultural and interreligious dialogue today ought to start from here, from the research of a way of common life which can leave aside any pretension of truth. This is another scandalous thesis of my presentation. Let's think about the Pope Benedict XVI, and this is the first encyclica, Deus Caritas Est. If you read the encyclica, which has a very nice title, Deus Caritas Est. Yes, but in the course of the development of the argumentation, it is clear that caritas without veritas has no sense. So, okay, I love my brothers, but it is the traditional say attributed to Aristotle, amicus Plato, sed magis amica veritas. Well, I am a friend of Plato, but I am more a friend of truth. So if Plato doesn't say the truth, or teaches mistakes, errors, and so on, well, again, by the hairs or with some other means. From the point of view of a European raised in the parameters of the Greek Christian universality tradition, the only way out of this dilemma, truth, caritas, and so on, is to push to the extreme charita and solidarity's prevalence over truth. In Italian, we have a paradoxical say that goes on, thanks God, I am an atheist. And this is really what Christians today, in my opinion, should try to be. Just because I am a Christian, I would translate, I don't believe in truth. But then I am always asking, how can you love the other if you do not believe that, truthfully, he is your brother, human nature, divine common descendants, rationality that talks to everyone, and so on? Is it possible to love the other without foundations? I certainly do not believe it is possible to set apart my history of Christian. It is only by pushing to the extreme what comes from such history, universality, but also the awareness of the errors that it has produced, that I find the reasonable way of not worrying anymore about truth. But how do my philosophical, religious, or academic fellows respond to this argument? Until now, all dialogues of this sort have oriented themselves towards the search for a common truth, which functions as foundation. But what could happen if finally the common search would be directed to do without truth, and that is without power? In the Christian scripture, and again in St. Augustine, there is a base to think that of all virtues, the one that survives forever is only charity. Certainly not the faith in this or that proposition on God, man, or the cosmos. When the Church speaks of natural law, generally it behaves like in the times of Galileo, when the Church spoke of the natural cosmology. So the sun turns and the earth is stable. Now, when they discovered that the Bible is not a handbook of cosmology, when will they discover that the Bible is not a handbook of anthropology? This is, as a matter of fact, this is a question. It is exactly like at the time of Galileo. I have, come dire, ammucchiato. I have put forward a lot of reasons to be suspicious against universalism, power, and then church as a power and not as a pure announcement of the gospel, and so on. Now, I try to draw some temporary provisional conclusions from these reflections. First, if we look at the history of Western civilization, universalism reveals to have always been a way of legitimizing some sort of imposition on the other. Not consciously, remember Plato, etc., etc., or St. Augustine, compel intrare, and so on and so forth. To put all this another way, do we need to acknowledge a truth to reach an agreement, or, on the opposite, we say that we have reached the truth when we reach an agreement? This is a philosophical, in my opinion, a philosophical essential question. What I'm trying to show is the connection between any claim to validity in the theoretical level and the factual existence of a power. In order to state that things are so and so, it reigns, you have to be somehow in power. You have to have the power to eliminate the quotation marks in Tarski's principle. Like Hobbes said, autoritas non veritas facit legem. We could translate, universal truth is only what is stated by the power. I am not saying the truth. That's the question. I am telling a story, the narrative of my experience as a philosopher who grew up in the Christian Western world and has made this experience with universalism. I used to believe that we as Westerners, as philosophers and as Christians, had been given the truth and we had the task to announce it all over the world. Go and convert and so on. For compassion vis-à-vis of our fellow human beings. But the practical fact of the revolt against colonialism and the practice of the new imperialism of globalized capitalism obliged me to rethink my philosophical idea of universalism. I did not make any theoretical discovery. I have just realized that I can no longer speak of universal truths in a world where different cultures have taken visibility, have come to the floor. I can no longer ignore the deep connection between truth and power. So what is there? So what? I'm finishing. Is there any conclusion to this prise de conscience? What I can offer is as a Westerner, to my partners in all interreligious dialogue, is my experience with the story of universalism. By the way, this is also my or a way to be Christian. The superiority in many quotation marks of Christianity consists in the fact, no matter what the popes think and say, that it is a religion, non-religion. The core of the Christian message is that God has abandoned his earth, transcendence, to become one of us. In other words, as an Italian dictum says, thanks God I am an atheist, I repeat, as an Italian I have this habit. But what if not a universal truth, a unified world under a rational democratic authority? I don't know. What I think I know is that as a Christian I have to take part with my fellow human beings who in their large majority are not what Walter Benjamin called the winners. So they don't have the authority to remove the quotation marks from the Tarski's principle. They are not shareholders of the existing order and therefore supporters of the practical imperial universalism which threatens to cancel humanity in its irreducible multiplicity of forms and values. Of course, as it is probably the case of all religions, I don't have the recipe for an ideal state. One cannot project an anarchic order. But in the current situation, it seems that some form of anarchic, theoretical and practical opposition would greatly help. That's all. Thank you.
What makes things worse in Europe today, in Western Europe at least, is that we interpret this very serious shortcoming or weakness as proof of our moral superiority over our lesser brethren in America or Asia or the Middle East, who still fancy that they have in themselves enough legitimacy and strength to advance their interests and support their prestige without asking for the permission of any higher authority. We have abandoned this pretension, and we feel the better for that. The old man from Königsberg, Immanuel Kant, I mean, is the true president of the European Union. The only legitimate actions are those susceptible to be generalized, universalized. We still feel the urge to extend or expand our domain. But we in Europe understand this extension or expansion as a progressive conversion of our neighbors to our superior morality. Our soft power is a power of example, our example. Other peoples, sooner or later, will follow our lead. They cannot fail to be duly impressed by the idea under which we think, act, and feel. They cannot fail to be duly impressed by the highest idea of whole, the most encompassing and authoritative idea, the idea of humanity. The European Union is not an ordinary body politic. It is not indeed a truly body politic. It's the first and constantly growing embodiment of mankind, sloughing off its old skin with its attendant vices of greed and self-aggrandizement. The European Union, in our conceit, augurs the end of all particularity, the beginning of universal humanity, immediately present to itself. That is, I think, a fair rendering of our highest moral aspirations. These moral aspirations in Europe today are not vain conceits. They translate into reality. They have come to more and more determine our economic, social, and political mores. They have come to more and more determine what is usually called the construction of Europe. What is the principle of this construction? It's a logical or philosophical principle. What is more general is superior to what is less general or more particular. A rather self-evident and innocuous sounding principle, indeed. But it is also a radical principle, because any association of human beings, as soon as it exists, as soon as it is real, is a particular association. That means it falls under the condemnation, at least the suspicion of the higher principle. The more real the association, the more suspect. Now, the most real association in Europe, the association through which European peoples have developed their talents. The association in which they still live principally is the nation, the old European nation-state. Thus, the effective truth of the European construction is the delegitimation of the nation-state, which has been for so long the political form par excellence in Europe. To come back to the terms of my introduction, it is as citizens of their respective nations that Europeans have learned to act according to their better judgment as a unity of purpose whose rulers are responsible before an identifiable people. It is as citizens of their respective nations that Europeans have accordingly developed trust, faith, or confidence in their own capacity or strength. Nevertheless, the authority of the higher principle does not bear upon the old nations only. It bears upon all ancient and particular associations. It accordingly bears upon the old churches, especially the one which has preserved the most, I think, its spiritual and organizational physiognomy, the Catholic Church. This higher principle, the principle of generality, of universality, is translated into the practical principle of freedom. In European terms, of freedom of circulation, as we say, for everything and everybody. It's a good and fair principle, as far as it goes. But the effects of this good and fair principle are especially deleterious when it has been made the only organizing principle. Thus, the trust in our ability to act together as a meaningful purpose has been progressively eroded and replaced by faith in a necessary mechanism. And we in the West say that if only goods and services and human beings are free to move, the results will be overwhelmingly positive. Here, a misunderstanding is to be prevented. This principle, the principle of freedom, is one of the mainsprings, perhaps the mainspring, of European accomplishments. But its fecundity is predicated upon the prior existence of a self-governing body politic. Human beings, Europeans have proved that, I think. Human beings better govern themselves when they give themselves more freedom, granted. But when freedom is divorced from any real self-governing body politic, it is a wholly different case indeed. Individual action is given encouragement, but collective action, that is, properly political action, is discouraged. It tends to lose meaning. People less and less understand what it means to act as a purposeful whole. It is sadly ironical for Europeans today to deplore the political weakness of Europe, since it is precisely what they are busy organizing. It is clear, to my mind at least, that Europeans have not lost all trust, faith, or confidence. But trust, faith, and confidence in collective action have been replaced by trust, faith, and confidence in impersonal processes. Contrary to what many critics contend, these processes are not solely economic processes. It's not only a matter of the market providing the only or principal regulation of our lives. These processes are also spiritual processes. We say, just let people move as they think fit and convenient, and they will necessarily recognize one another as equal and similar human beings, and the purpose of the human species will be fulfilled. the European enterprise is not a petty endeavor. It aims at a configuration of things in which human beings no longer need any political associations to be fully human. More, it is by avoiding truly political associations that they will be truly human at last. I will limit myself to a few points to discuss this our great perspective and to contest it. Whatever else it might have been, the modern project which swept Europe from the 17th or even the 16th century onwards was a prodigious expression or manifestation of self-confidence or trust or faith in one's own forces. While they labored under repression, poverty, even hunger, and all sorts of incurable diseases, the Europeans dreamed of a free and prosperous society where human beings led long lives in comfort and health. And lo and behold, thus it came to pass. It was not a dream. It was an emphatically rational project encapsulated in Bacon's motto of the relief of man's estate and in Descartes' motto of the mastery and possession of nature. Here is the still unresolved enigma. How could this great man so confidently believe that mankind could and would accomplish so great a transformation when modern science had just declared its ambition, but had yet nothing to show for it? It is to me one of the great mysteries of European faith. Thus, modern Europe began with a leap of faith in science. I have just stressed that this leap of faith was first made by a tiny squad of eminent and supremely self-confident men. A decisive inflection intervened when the transformation they had so confidently called for and mightily prepared began to appear to a growing body of European people as an irresistible process. This human endeavor was so consonant with human reason, and its effects were so obviously good, that at some point, progress was no longer simply our task or work, it inseparably became our Lord. Henceforth, it was not so clear whether we were its masters or its servants. From about the middle of the 18th century to about the middle of the 20th century, Western history evolved under the cloud of this ambiguity. History, with a capital H, became the new deity, which could claim a constantly growing number of believers and faithful. Faith in history became the prevailing faith, although there was much disagreement about the right interpretation and the legitimate interpreters of that faith. Secular religions, secular religion séculière, in Raymond Aron's phrase, came to blows, and much worse. It was a matter of securing for one's sect the exclusive favor of the new and supremely powerful deity, history. The ordeal between Nazi Germany and communist Russia was, among other things, a superhuman and inhuman exertion to disclose and manifest the right bearer of history's favor of grace. You in this country know something about that. But it would be wrong to look at European history through the lenses of its greatest disaster. Below the gathering clouds of history, European peoples rather reasonably and successfully developed the new frame of their collective action through the progressive building of the representative government within a national setting. Here, representative government within a national setting, here was arguably the cumulative and positive result of the whole European development, as discerning 19th century historians, like Guizot, for instance, clearly understood. Representative government, it rests not only on a difficult arranging of institutions, but also on a precarious ordering of affects or feelings. To put it in a nutshell, in representative government, to the trust of the people answers a feeling of responsibility of the rulers. As everybody knows, just as the people, are prompt to withdraw their trust, the latter, the rulers, are prone to forget their responsibility. Trust on one hand, responsibility on the other hand. Here is the rub. Here is the philosopher's stone. European experience is proof that this is pretty sure. Trust and responsibility can go together only in a setting where the fellow feeling, the feeling of commonality, the feeling of friendship is wide and deep. Otherwise, however excellent the intentions of the protagonists, there can be neither trust nor responsibility. Now, where are we? We in the West, we have not lost all faith in our capacities, but we are more and more alert to the limits, even the drawbacks of progress. Bacon's or Descartes' confidence, perhaps overconfidence in our own forces, has migrated to Shanghai, Mumbai, and Dubai. We still work madly at the lengthening of human life while despairing of our ability to pay for it. Our confidence is at times hard to distinguish from spiritual inertia. While the disasters of the previous century have made us lose faith in history, which is rather happy, we at the same time no longer feel the need for political trust in a body politic for representative government. We in Europe no longer live in the political element in Western Europe. We no longer live in the element of action. Collective action to be decided after a reasonably common, reasonably democratic deliberation. We are really confident in the modern project, feeling no faith in history, having no need of trust, we have abandoned ourselves to the supposed necessity of the extension, irresistible necessity of the extension of the democratic civilization, which was first nurtured, nourished under the protection of the sovereign state and in the friendly setting of the national association, and which, it's our wager, will be able to survive and prosper without either. This is a wager we are fated to lose. There is no salvaging, to say nothing of developing European civilization, while dismantling its political conditions. Present-day Europe, and again, it's a Western perspective on that. Present-day Europe lives on a logical error. It pretends to enjoy beneficial effects while methodically destroying their cause. On a political error, it pretends to build an ever better democracy while getting rid of any identifiable people on a moral error, it turns its back on meaningful responsibility by pretending that the enforcing of human rights can and should be independent of any concrete human associations. These errors are fairly easy to discern. Why are they so difficult to acknowledge? It's because I think of the mightiest, the most potent affect in Europe today, which is our feeling of moral superiority, to which I alluded at the beginning of these remarks. We feel too morally superior to condescend to consider elementary facts of moral and political life. And this exacerbated moralism has succeeded in imposing a fairly severe discipline of speech among us, at least in the West. I will skip this point. So important in the West of political correctness, and I hasten toward some sort of conclusion. Only by shedding this unwarranted conviction of moral superiority will the Europeans make themselves able to engage again into meaningful actions. The common purpose of Europeans in the West today seems to be to preserve an innocence which they have just recovered in their own conceit at least, when they fairly recently they disowned and renounced the sins of colonialism and war. This inaction cannot go on forever, or it will end by depriving the European enterprise of any remaining plausibility. Like all other political bodies, Europe needs to engage in collective actions, actions through which it will be recognized by others and recognize itself as an identifiable whole. Since, and it would be the main political point of my talk, since the European Union has no real political existence, these collective actions can only be the common endeavor of at least a number of European nations. Europe will begin to exist politically when different European nations will succeed in formulating a common European purpose and acting upon it. The field in which these common European actions will have a creative meaning, a meaning for the whole of Europe, and will help to make Europe a new whole, a new meaningful unity of purpose, won't be actions purporting to homogenize European life, to make all Europeans the same. It will be actions directed toward non-European body politics, non-European spiritual masses, as Hegel would have said, in our interactions with non-European powers, that some European specific, distinctive political and spiritual life will come into being, if it has any chance of coming into being. And so, since you alluded to my Master Aron, and he always was very careful that what he said about politics had some practical bearing and practical purpose, I would say that the direction in which I, for one, would look for the building of Europe, it would be in the way our differing nations try to elaborate common actions in direction of our great contemporary brethren in America, in Asia, in the Muslim world. And it's only if we are able to elaborate a distinct European discourse or speech and distinct European actions in direction of non-Western powers, or at least non-European powers, it's only in this direction that there will be meaning for European solidarity, European faith, and European trust. Thank you.
Fifteen minutes till the next panel. Are there any questions that you would like to address to the panelists? Please feel free. Yes, questions, not debates. Yes, Elżbieta. No.
Now it works. Now it works. Elżbieta Cierzewska, Warsaw University. I've got a short question to Professor Gianni Vattimo. Thank you very much for your interesting speech. And I've got a question on the metaphor you have used in your presentation. You quoted the sentence, the phrase of Alfred Tarski, when it rains, it is true only when it rains. And I've got a kind of problem with this metaphor, because when it rains, it is self-evident. And I think that we don't need any authority to tell us when it rains, we just know it. And because of that, I've got also a problem with the understanding of truth that you have proposed in your speech, because I think that maybe ideology would be a better word for the reality you have described, because I think there are some truths that are self-evident and they don't really depend on any authority. This is my question. Thank you.
My question was against those who take this model of truth for any kind of truth, because so many propositions, factual, are interpretative, that of course even the fact that it rains can be, if we took examples like the ones sometimes the analytic philosophers do. If I were somebody with a complete skin of a different material and so on, probably wouldn't feel the rain so strongly as we feel. So it is because I belong to the same community of humans with skin of this kind and hairs and so on, that I realize so immediately that it rains. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that there is any possible statement put outside of a paradigm. That's all. I am, of course, I am a disciple of Gadamer and of Heidegger and persons like that. And this is, of course, the simplest example is it rains. Okay, we don't have doubts, but nobody asks who says that it rains, because it is not that important. But if you say human soul is immortal, it's a fact. I find it evident. So, okay, why don't you find it evident? Because you have some interest in denying that. So no natural phenomenon is so evident until somebody doesn't cast a doubt about it. Of course, there are many facts of our everyday life on which we don't cast any doubt, and that in this you are right. To believe that it is always possible to verify whether it rains or not, it's already another question.
Thank you.
I give a question to Professor Vattimo especially, because in his vision he had to leave transcendental universal truths, that it's complicated, and also that the Bible can be a manual of anthropology. And in my opinion, it's very theoretical, and it's an oxymoron to have religion without transcendental truths. Obviously, there are different ways and different ways of discovering different truths for Judaism and Christianity and Islam and so on, Buddhism. But it's always based on conviction of that we share transcendental truths. It's a base of religion. Religion which connects, even in Buddhism, which is not connection with God, but it's also transcendental reveal of transcendental truths. So I guess it's impossible to remove this problem. So we can move forward to public square, how we can meet different religions on a public square, because religion without transcendental truth is not religion, or even ideology, as Nazis and communists were this deep conviction about revealing transcendental truths. So for me there are some conditions which have to be fulfilled if religion would like to exist in free world, in democratic world. And first, I guess, it's a common necessary for every religion, which could be shared, and it's based on Bible, but biblical anthropology, but it means human dignity. Human dignity of every human being, men and women, black, white, and so on and so on. And I guess it's a core, that we recognize human dignity. And then more practically, it's freedom of conscience, and for example, how you treat conversion in the religion. Secondly, separation of political and ecclesiastical power, obviously. Thirdly, ideological potential. It means, does religion insist to have a concrete social political project and try to achieve it, to realize it in social life? And then, what it's phrased John Paul II, it's politics of forgiveness, based on culture of forgiveness. It's potential to overcome divisions, to forgive after since not eye for eye as a method of politics. And I guess if religion fulfills these any religion fulfills these four conditions, it can be very positively built free society in pluralistic world.
First of all, take also my presentation as a form of provocation in a situation in which I feel that the danger for humanity is not the lack of unity, but the excess of unity. This is the question. And so I probably exaggerated on the other side. But when you say that there are common, let's say, some common items in our tradition which are biblical and not only biblical because are universally human, I can accept it only not as based upon the knowledge of something, but upon the struggle for something. So when you cite the human dignity, in the Middle Ages was not the same, and the Bible was there, already available. So it's a matter of what we call natural rights, are historically conquered rights by the struggle of the people. No sovereign has given the constitution to his people because a philosopher had persuaded him that there was equality of rights. That there was peasants under his windows with sticks and arms and stones asking for that. So what I am discussing is the pretension to base a correct religious attitude or political attitude on factual descriptions. What we call natural rights are historically conquered rights. On the basis of what? On the basis of persuasions also, of course, but shared persuasion and so on, and generally we share confidence and ideas with people with whom we do revolution, we constitute a state, we write a constitution, okay. My problem is that all this is never founded upon a knowledge, a basis, a theoretical basis, the knowledge of some truth. It is based upon the revindication of some right, of some possibility of existence, and of some project. Of course, as to religion, I accept, I don't have a general definition of religion. This is a problem. Because if you go around the world, there are many many things which we call religions, but for instance, Roman religion was the Roman religion, but it was based of the Latin, but it was based upon the state. Sacer was what sacred was what was established as sacred by the Senatus Populusque Romanus. There was no objectively, naturally thing which was called sacred, and so on. So in many senses, I feel religious because I don't believe that I have started by myself. What Schleiermacher called the feeling of the infinite. Okay, this is, and well, I decline this in the language of the Bible because I grew up in this tradition. But I would never try to convert to my religion. Why should they be saved because they believe that God is one in three persons? The only thing I can do is to give the example of the charity to the other one. And believing in Jesus as a model, like Schleiermacher thought. But, for instance, to go around the world trying to convert people, convert is already, I was a member of the Action Catholique, Catholic Action in Italy. I wanted to convert my fellow young boys in the school and so on. Yeah, but, what was it? This is a question. To give a good example is important. To think, I make just this example because it strikes me every time I think of it. When the Pope meets the Dalai Lama, okay, they say, sanctity, your holiness, and so on. They pray together. And then the Dalai Lama goes away without having converted to Catholicism. What does the Pope do? Retires in his chapel and prays for the poor man who will be damned for eternity because he didn't convert. You cannot believe that. So neither the cardinals say today explicitly, say extra ecclesiam nulla salus, but they still believe that. If in the measure in which they believe that without believing in all the articles of the Credo, you are not saved, and so on. So there are many questions, more questions than answers. Thank you.